Hey, good morning, gang. We are in Dayton, Ohio, of all places. I made the 5-hour drive yesterday, stayed at the Marriott Dayton University Hotel to do one grave, but it's going to be worth it. Call me crazy. You can definitely call me completely obsessive, because when it comes to graves that relate to being buried alive or escape hatches, I'm obsessed. So we are here right now at Calvary Cemetery in Dayton. It's a very old cemetery, and we're going to do it a little different today. And that is, we're not going to stop the camera. We're going to go seamless all the way to the grave, because it's unbelievably scenic if you like cemeteries, and we are in. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Dayton. It was in 1796 that a man named Israel Ludlow surveyed and platted this town of Dayton along the Great Miami River near the mouth of the Mad River in what is now southwest Ohio. The town here was named for a politician and Revolutionary War veteran, Jonathan Dayton, who was from New Jersey. By the end of that same year, more than 40 log cabins and frame houses had been built. And many of the original settlers, well, they believed that they had legally acquired their land, but disputes arose over land ownership due to poor surveying. So many residents ended up paying additional sums of money to become the unchallenged owners of their own property. And in addition to these problems, Dayton was also built on a floodplain, and the community was flooded a number of times in its early years. When Ohio finally became a state in 1803, Dayton became the seat of Montgomery County. Beyond its initial growth, the town remained relatively small until the War of 1812. During this conflict, Dayton served as a mobilization point for American attacks on Canada against the British troops in the northwestern part of the United States. During and shortly after the war, a tobacco factory, 2 banks, textile mills, and several other businesses were initiated. With the completion of the Miami and Erie Canal in 1829, Dayton was now linked to Cincinnati, and the town continued to thrive. The cemetery here is very old, and there's a lot of history associated with it that parallels Dayton's growth. So going back to that founding of Dayton in 1796, it was Catholic families that started to make their way up the Miami River from Cincinnati to settle here. By 1833, there were 3 parishes, German, Gaelic, and English-speaking, enough to establish a plot of sanctified ground in the middle of the rapidly growing town. This first Catholic cemetery was called St. Henry's. As German, Irish, Polish, Hungarian, Italian, and Lithuanian immigrants flooded into the Miami Valley during the 1840s, Dayton's Catholic community swelled and spilled over into the surrounding neighborhoods. This created new parishes and more need for burial ground. The epidemics that came in the 1850s and the tragic deaths of so many in the Civil War in the 1860s filled St. Henry's remaining space. Now landlocked by a city grown up around it, St. Henry's had no room to expand. The population continued to grow, and finally in 1872, Calvary Cemetery was established on 100 acres of southern countryside, this rolling, hilly land, adding 100 more acres in later years. Calvary Cemetery was ideally located at the highest vantage point of the city and adjacent to the canal, which was Dayton's main thoroughfare at the time. As the 20th century drew near, trustees of St. Henry's realized the value of consolidating their grounds with Calvary. Over a 20-year period, the burial plots of St. Henry's were very carefully moved to new sites within Calvary. During this process, some of the earliest graves could no longer be identified from their markers, and family and church records could not be found. For this group of faithful departed, a special place of reinterment was created. On All Souls Day, 1902, St. Henry's Chapel was dedicated on this site. Today there are more than 80,000 graves here, and only half of the usable space of 200 acres is occupied. And here we are at the Hochwalt family plot. All right. Well, let's have a look and see what's going on here. Beautiful morning. We have very, very old. This is the section number 1, the oldest part of the cemetery. And it is dramatic. This monument here is the family plot marker for the Hochwalts. And that's the German pronunciation. I'm German. It could be Hochwalt or Hochwalt. So we're going to go with one of those. And here we see the graves of the initial family members. First thing I see here is George and Theresia, and we know that these are the parents. But I see something interesting here. I see Theresia is wife of George Hochwalt, and here is Christina, also wife. Now, if we look at the dates here, 1821 to 1858, we can surmise that Christina was his first wife. They came from Hessen, Germany, emigrated, and I'm guessing, yeah, Christina was probably from Germany, emigrated with George. She died in 1858. They probably got married within 2 or 3 years. That is Teresa and George. And looking at the birth dates, Teresa was, if my math is correct, 32 years old when they had Anna, and here is Anna, daughter of, so we know that is Teresa's daughter, and she was born well after Christina, George's first wife, died, so there's no question there. This is quite a little place here. You have to be here to really appreciate it. This hill goes down. I don't know how they mow this lawn. It's like a cliff, and it is stunning. And look at this angel. Wow. Check that out. That is just amazing. It's very large. It's hard to describe it. But there are a lot of, if you come here, there are a lot of amazing statues. And like we saw at Natchez City, There are some amazing vistas also that you can see as you look out over the countryside. Just stunning. Okay, enough with the sightseeing. Let's talk about Anna. It's a terrifying story, gang. I gotta tell you, she was buried alive. She was buried alive. And I can tell you that for me, there is no worse way to go. I would rather be eaten by sharks than have that happen, to be stuck in a coffin. But it was on January either 9th or 10th. There's conflicting information on that. But Anna had gone downstairs to the kitchen after she was dressing on the day of her brother's wedding. And it was either, looking at the dates and the siblings, it's either going to be brother Edward or Charles, probably Edward, who was getting married. And she was not feeling well. So she was in the kitchen, she got a glass of water, she sat down in a chair across from the table against the wall. And she never moved again because her mother, Teresia, came in shortly and saw her. So, of course, Dad came, the family, they moved her to the bedroom and called the doctor. Now, what the doctors would do, they all thought she was dead. And beyond checking the pulse, they would normally also, sometimes, I shouldn't say normally, use a mirror and put it under the nose to see if there's any steam, like breath, but not breath, coming out of your nose. And the doctor pronounced her dead. So he determined that it was a result of quote-unquote sympathetic heart palpitation combined with her naturally nervous disposition. And she was kind of a very nervous, uptight, jumpy type. So it just may have been the stress from the wedding coming up. Maybe, I'm sure she was participating. Maybe she had to give who knows, a speech or a toast. But we can only guess. But when the family, like the younger ones, were looking at her, and of course there were other viewings, they said, quote unquote, she was lacking, her ears were lacking the ghastly pallor of death. And it is also said that they were starting to think she was still alive. Now, her eyes, and let me explain something. In those days, they didn't really do embalming yet. I think till the Civil War, they really just started. So, I mean, this was after the Civil War, but out in the country, out here. So the idea was you want to bury the person as soon as possible, like the next day. And that's why a lot of this stuff, not a lot of it, but it happened a few times. So you would check the eyes and wait a day or two, because what happens with your eyes is, and you've seen probably pictures of dead people or dead animals, your eyes turn milky white. And the reason they do that is because once your circulation stops, there's fluid behind and around your retina, your pupil and all that. And once that, it's crystal clear. And once it stops moving, it gets stagnated and it turns that color. So we can only wonder about that, and I'm sure looking at her eyes so soon after death, I'd be interested to know how many hours from the nurses or the doctors out there watching the channel, how many hours does it take before your eyes really turn that color? So I was looking, by the way, at the ancestry, and it looks like from all the dates I've seen, Anna was the first to be buried here. She's the earliest grave. But getting back to the story, so she was buried alive because the talk of the town, it just wouldn't quit. Nobody would quit talking about it. So finally, Teresia and George had her disinterred. And when they did, they opened the coffin, and it was a horrifying sight. She was on her right side. Her fingers were chewed to the bone. Tufts of her hair were pulled out of her head. And she was almost bald. Attempts, by the way, after that, they reburied her right away. And they tried to keep it a secret, but by early February, the whole town was in complete shock. And the word just spread like wildfire. So, I don't know, as I stand here and you think about that, she was reburied after that happened. And by the way, her tombstone is the only stone that's cockeyed and crooked in this whole area. Well, I shouldn't say the whole area, but this line. There's other family members over here. Those are all Hochwalts. And her tombstone is, interestingly, you know, you just got to wonder, after being disinterred and moved around, was there another struggle below? Now, I'm not saying from the mortal side, the mortal being, but I'm just saying, you wake those spirits and they don't leave. Who knows? So that's how we're going to close this one out. Just terrifying. Like I said, I'd rather be eaten by sharks. Maybe burned by fire. Maybe it would be close. I don't know. This would be the worst. This would be the worst. What do you guys think? What would you choose? Anyway, signing off. I'm going to actually continue in episode 2 here and do a walk to look at some of these amazing tombs for those of you that want to check that out. All right, have a good one. Stay safe, y'all.